The PlayStation 3 is gonna be 16 soon. Oh boy. It only felt like yesterday that the 7th generation of video games was gracing us with its weird staples. Games were becoming shorter, more and more online, and filled with enough bloom and lens flare to look like a new Star Trek film. Coming hot off the PlayStation 2 and original Xbox, the PlayStation 3 and other consoles from the time would continue to try and push the visual envelope at the cost of frame rate, and well, that's just what we had to deal with, especially considering PC ports around this time were questionable. BioShock and DRM, a match made in hell. But for every mega hit like Skyrim, Batman Arkham Asylum, the eternally popular Call of Duty franchise, and even The Last of Us, which aged well enough that I don't think it even needs a remake, we've got loads of forgotten titles. Sony and the PlayStation brand have done really well as a video game publisher and console maker in just about every generation, except this one. The first few years of this thing were rough, no thanks in part to the Cell processor and how allegedly difficult it was to work with. Anyone who was around back then surely remembers the PS3 has no games meme. This generation of video game consoles were the first that tried to enter the Steam stratosphere of having digital markets and smaller games that you could only get from their servers. Even something as heavily advertised and as big as Sony's first-party exclusive Fat Princess could come out and get totally passed over because it just wasn't the norm yet. Did I want a physical copy of Nobi Nobi Boy? Absolutely. A lost cause. This also introduced us to a completely foreign concept, the removal of games. It wasn't until recently that something like Scott Pilgrim vs. the World, the game, a fantastic side-scrolling beat-em-up, was just completely lost to time. People were making a side hustle recycling PS3s with downloads of Marvel vs. Capcom 2. All in all, there are over 2,500 individual video game SKUs for the PS3, which is a metric butt ton, and we're gonna talk about a few. We're gonna keep it exclusive though, otherwise we'd just be talking about Armored Core for Answer. That's not so bad though.
So yo, it's Austin, and today we're going to be talking about forgotten and weird PlayStation 3 games, because yes, despite the PS3 having no games, there's a lot to talk about. Though if anyone has that old chalkboard meme with all the games crossed out on it, send that my way. I cannot find it. But before we get started today, no memes, I want to talk to y'all about today's sponsor, Factor. I think like most people, I'm a fan of eating, but with how much work I'm usually doing, I don't really have enough time to prepare myself a healthy meal. Well, that's where Factor comes in. Factor is a deliverable meal kit that sends freshly prepackaged meals straight to your door. We're talking low calorie, keto, vegan, vegetarian, highly customizable meal choices that are as easy to cook as pressing a few buttons. There's a rotating weekly menu that has usually 25 or more meal options with different add-ons you can include. There's a lot of flexibility for different diets here, and it's just nice to eat something healthy because proper fitness starts with food. For instance, the sweet lemongrass beef. Toss this thing right into the microwave and have yourself a healthy meal that's tasty as well. And if you have even less time, you can grab one of Factor's plant-based smoothies, which are delicious, nutritious, and good on the go. Factor is now owned by HelloFresh, so if you put both of these together, that's a lot of variety of options for healthy meals that you have, so you can try both with a discount from me. My partner and I have been switching between the two every few months, and well, it's been fresh. So if you're wanting to eat healthy or just need to help support a busier lifestyle, head on over to go.factor75.com/eruption120 and use the code eruption120 to get $120 off your first purchase. It's time for some good food. That's go.factor75.com/eruption120 to save $120 today. Thanks to Factor for the sponsor. I'm eating good and now you will too. But for now, we need to go back to video games. And I think I want to start with the digital world. Now, there is a ton of digital-only PlayStation 3 games that came out over the, 12 years the console was relevant, so I think I want to get started with one of the weirdest and maybe more overlooked titles, Tokyo Jungle.
Tokyo Jungle is strange. Just the entire concept. It's simple. All of mankind is extinct. Only animals roam the streets. As in, everyone's dead. Tokyo's left being overgrown, and you get to play as a cute little Pomeranian. Murder. Developed by Crispies Incorporated, Tokyo Jungle is a first-party published Sony title that came out in 2012 to, at least in the States, little fanfare and mixed reviews. I think this is partly due to just how freaking absurd this is. TJ's a survival game, and you go around creating packs of animals to try and thrive. You've got to take care of your hunger, watch your health, and avoid being absolutely wrecked by other, even bigger animals. The story mode has you playing as a bunch of different creatures, and there's a ton of them, from small dogs to deer, horses, and king of the jungle lions. There's a bunch of different ways to play this. The neat part is the arcadey approach to it. Time flows quickly as you try to survive, and you're able to unlock new routes and different things while playing as one animal, each of which have different playstyles. Small and medium creatures can hide in the tall grass, larger things can carry carcasses, and there's areas that are restricted depending on your size. How you play also changes depending on whether or not you're a carnivore or a herbivore. It's easier to make friends as a vegetarian, that's for sure, although this whole game kind of comes off like a Mafia City ad. It reminds me a lot of Evo for the Super Nintendo or other games like this. Also, there's robot dogs. Is this brand synergy? Each animal has a story to it with random occurrences that can make things unique. You'll see more of that though in the survival mode that really just lets you have some fun. Tokyo Jungle has a strange sense of humor, but it's one I dig. I mean, what other game lets you Metal Gear Solid your way through the streets as a fawn? The game itself is a little jank though, a little hard to understand and totally unhinged, but it's got a lot of charm. It kind of falls into a roguelike category, so you'll be doing your best to get longer survival times after finishing the story. It's definitely not for everyone though, and I can see why no one really talked about this at the time. I mean, in 2012, people were playing games like Borderlands 2, Mass Effect 3, and XCOM. Who's downloading Tokyo Jungle except freaks like me? Look, all I'm saying is that if you weren't scared of golden retrievers before, you're about to be. Keeping it with Crispies though for a second, they weren't done. This short-lived Japanese developer would follow Tokyo Jungle up with, well, a PlayStation mobile version of the same game, but also 2 years later in 2014, a brand new project, one that transcended video games. Short piece, Ranko Tsukigime's Longest Day. This one needs a little backstory. Short Piece is a Japanese multimedia project that consists of 4 short films and a video game. It was a collaborative effort with a bunch of different directors, including Katsuhiro Otomo of Akira fame, and Hajime Katoki, who was a well-known mecha designer. Gundam, you know it. Each of these films takes place in a different historical period of Japan, and some of them were award-winning. Well, in order to wrap up the project and represent the modern age, they decided to make the final piece a video game, Ranko Tsukigime's Longest Day. And if you can't tell, Suda51 was part of it. Ranko Tsukigime is what happens if you try to develop a game on crystal meth. It tells the story of a girl with an eye patch who's a high schooler who's also out for revenge from her father who killed her mother. She's also a dragon slayer, wrestler, and Pomeranian slayer. Yeah, things get more than a little absurd here, but it's a fun ride all the way through. The gameplay itself is just where it's kind of meh. Ranko is a platformer that, if anything, feels a bit closer to Sonic the Hedgehog than anything else. You've got to constantly run to the right while grabbing collectibles and destroying objects. There's an evil force chasing you that you have to blast away every now and then, but it's nothing too special. It's what happens in between these stages that is. Ranko's got every bit of that Suda51 and Grasshopper energy that we've all grown to love. Each animated sequence between levels feels like it was done by a completely different animation studio. The style totally changes. 1 second you're looking at 3D anime, then it's rotoscoped, it kind of looks like Trigger at one point, and then it turns into something that resembles Gallo Sengen. I think about this a lot. It turns out the animation studio is responsible for Pop Team Epic, so go figure. The story of Ranko is a bit hard to follow, as you'd probably expect, but it definitely feels like something Suda51 put together into a tight hour-long package, and I love every second of its nonsensicality. Between this and Short Piece, it's definitely a totally absurd collaboration of games and films that time's gonna forget, especially considering it's PS3 digital only here in the States. They're only now re-releasing the films in the West, but since there's no port, the game's destined to eventually disappear with the PlayStation 3 store. Even the Japanese physical version's rare. It's just the shame that the game part of Ranko is okay at best. Never been so scared of a Pomeranian. There are so many cool digital games on the PlayStation 3 store, and don't think I forgot about them. Bionic Commando Rearmed, Hardcore Uprising, and infamous Festival of Blood immediately come to mind. Some of the 7th gen digital games have come forward a gen or two, some are even backwards compatible on the Xbox, and unfortunately some are relegated to PlayStation Plus's streaming, which even in 2022 with a wired gigabyte connection, it still kinda sucks. So get those PS3 digital games while you can. Don't miss out on Super Rub-a-Dub. You'll just have to navigate the hellscape known as the PS3 store with its helpful genre selections such as Best of Sonic, Best of 2K, Best of Sonic, Best of 2K.
All right, let's drive out of the digital world for a second and talk about one of my favorite genres, driving games. It might be weird, but car video games are some of my favorites, and if you put something like Forza Horizon 5 in front of my face, I'm gonna play it, and that was the case for a lot of PS3 exclusives as well.
No, I'm not talking about Gran Turismo, though it'd probably be fair to call GT Concept a forgotten game. I'm looking more into the absurd side. The 7th generation of games had a bit of a love affair with unrealistic racers, and I'm a huge fan of that. You put that Burnout name on anything, and I'm gonna play it. Double so for kart racers. While I still see Sonic and All-Stars Racing transformed as the GOAT for a while there, I was totally in love with Mod Nation Racers. Developed by United Front Games, the people who brought us Sleeping Dogs and Little Big Planet Karting, it was to kart racers what Little Big Planet was to platformers. You got a concept? Create it, be it tracks, characters, or courses. And it was really easy to use, but unfortunately all the servers were shut down in 2018, so that crappy Rei Ayanami skin I made day one that got 10,000 downloads is gone. Pour one out for my girl, don't even have a picture.
Mod Nation Racer is not playable in its intended format anymore, but you can play MotorStorm. Anyone remember MotorStorm?
In 2022, MotorStorm feels like a blur. In the PlayStation 3 days, Sony was pushing these things out left and right, and for good reason. It was a good display of the power of the cell, while also being a decent racer. There's a good chance you have heard of this, but there's a better chance you haven't heard that there were 5 of them. The original MotorStorm was a launch window game, coming out a month after the console, and it's easily one of the best for that first year. But that's what happens when your launch competitions like Sonic 06, Mobile Suit Gundam Crossfire, Full Auto 2, and
So here's this giant enemy crab.
Developed by British developer Evolution Studios, who have only really made other games like this, MotorStorm and its sequels are all pretty decent off-road racers. It's chaos, it's lots of deserts, and long enough load times that'll make you think your PS3 is about to brick. Moving on, we've got MotorStorm Pacific Rift, this time with water. Then there's MotorStorm Arctic Edge, this time with more ice. It was called Raging Ice in Japan, and it's a way better name, by the way. But the one I dig the most was MotorStorm Apocalypse, this time with more End of the World. Coming out in 2011, a year before the Rapture and George Lucas conveniently selling Star Wars, MotorStorm Apocalypse takes the concept of the off-road race and decides to toss a little bit of split second into it. It's quite literally one of the most chaotic racing games I've ever played, and that's to its credit. You'll be doing what you think are normal laps while bridges are falling down around you, war starts to break out, earthquakes are destroying entire cities, and well, it's just a fun time. Every lap feels like you're just trying to survive instead of race, which, to be fair, is totally absurd, but it works well as a video game. Top it off with slow motion vehicle destruction, and you've got yourself a good time. You have a permanent boost like in the other games, but you have to balance it with your heat gauge so you don't blow up. This can be as simple as driving through water. There's cars, motorcycles, jeeps, trucks, you name it. Since previous MotorStorm games focused on being in the wilderness, it was nice to see the developer put together destroyed urban environments in a way that felt natural to the series. Like the other games, it's a solid, slippery, and destructive time that'll last you a few hours of fun. No more multiplayer though, it's all offline. You're probably not going to be trying for best times over and over like a Mario Kart speedrun anyways, but it's fun while it lasts. The only major iffy parts here are some of the old school PlayStation 3 load times and some pretty cringe storytelling that they did with cartoony stills. Let's just say that they want to be amped 3, but they're not. Although truly, no one is. Unfortunately, after this and a Vita spinoff called MotorStorm RC, which was okay, Evolution Studios would put out their last Sony-published game with Drive Club, something that had mixed reception and a bunch of issues. And well, that'd be it. Besides Drive Club VR, which was the first and only VR game to make me so sick I had to lie down for 3 hours. So thanks, guys. Give MotorStorm Apocalypse a try if you can. If you're feeling sporty, you can even try it on PlayStation now. It works well enough, even if it looks a little crusty.
Alright, let's swap sides of the planet for a second. MotorStorm's great and all, but I want to talk about Japanese developers. Sony has always been in this weird spot where they don't have like characters and franchises that have passed down through multiple generations, with the exception of like Ratchet at this point, but they did have a lot of weird studios putting out different games, such as Africa.
Ah yes, Africa. The 6-axis controlled version of Pokemon Snap. Anyone got a spare $150? Africa came out in 2009, and for some reason, despite having a PlayStation Network store page, it just says Africa trademark. Okay then. This is one of the strangest PS3 games you can try, and I've never gotten my hands on a copy myself because, well, I've literally never seen one, though I've heard the game is mid at best. Speaking of mid, how about Trinity Souls of Zill? Y'all ever heard of this one? Tecmo Koei, or more specifically Omega Force, was in a strange spot in the 2010s. Prior to them becoming the people for licensed Musou game, they'd only really dipped their toes in with Dynasty Warriors Gundam and Fist of the North Star. If it wasn't Dynasty or Samurai Warriors related, it was probably something like Blade Storm or Windback. I do love Windback. In fact, I was originally going to talk about Dynasty Warriors Gundam Reborn, and I even went through the painful process of buying a game on PlayStation 3 PSN these days, where you have to add money to your wallet on the website, which will fail constantly for no reason, but it just wasn't as good as the previous ones. Do I have 140 hours in Gundam 3? Absolutely. Well, in 2010, they'd take on the Zill franchise, and if you aren't sure what that is, I don't blame you. Until this game, it was a Japanese-only Tecmo Koei JRPG franchise that, at a glance, looking through footage online, doesn't seem like too much. In a time where JRPGs were filled with bright and standout character designs, the dark and kinda dull look of Zill and its sequel Infinite doesn't impress. So I guess wanting to try something different with their in-house franchise, they tossed it to Omega Force, and this is what we got. Trinity. You assume control of one of three characters led by Areus, a half-elf on a quest for grand patricide. It took the formula of Dynasty Warriors, plopped it into an action RPG setting with loot and leveling, and called it a day. And it's not awful. Despite what some of the reviews from the time might say, for what this is, Trinity is a decent hidden experience on the PlayStation 3. I say experience because no, it's not a gym, but it's not bad. When you look at things in retrospect, Trinity Souls of Zill seems to be a transition point for Omega Force. Like, this was a step towards the higher quality they'd output these days with Dragon Quest Warriors, Persona 5 Strikers, or whatever they're doing now. Sure, you might not have a counter on the screen that says 3 million kills, but it did adapt the formula decently. It would be cool to see them revisit this series another time, as the art style is unique. It's almost like a better version of Babylon's Fall. Hey, if we're talking about 7th gen games and Japanese developers though, there's no one more important, I think, than From Software. Dark Souls became a phenomenon and their entire focus shifted during the PlayStation 3 years. Do I miss Tenchu? Yeah. Armored Core? Again, yes, but back in the day when they were putting out a ton of different games, they also published things.
It might have been Atlas when it came stateside, but in Japan, From Software put out 3D Dot Game Heroes, and I love this one.
You can literally smell the nostalgia. 3D Dot Game Heroes is simply put an homage to the 2D Zelda games. It's a Zelda clone, it knows what it is and it wears that badge with pride. It's like a parody of that genre and is self-aware of the fact that it's a 2D game now in 3D. Everywhere you look you can see some Zelda or Dragon Quest, and that's to its benefit. 3D Dot Game Heroes is the fake game you'd play in something like Retro Game Challenge on the DS. You play the hero and you can make them look however you want. You can take all the time in the world to create your character and their animations brick by brick, or you can choose Taco Man. Easy choice. His eyes glow red anytime he attacks as if he craves nothing but violence. And fire salsa. Gameplay is exactly what you'd expect. You go throughout this world, going into dungeons, collecting items to open up new parts of the map, to find new dungeons, to eventually beat the big bad. Except there's Bloom. The water in this game looks ridiculous. It's like I'm looking at an effect from Reboot. I think 3D here is about as fan service as you can get, not just in the way it plays, but the stupid stuff it lets you do. You want a big sword? Have the biggest sword ever. Dialogue from NPCs is generally silly, sometimes actually funny. When you beat the game, you'll be thrown a hard difficulty to get those real FromSoft vibes. It's called From Mode, for God's sakes. The biggest problem here is that, yeah, it's just a mishmash of old ideas, but presented as new, so there's a lack of originality. I think that's alright though, as everything about the presentation, both visually and sonically, scream familiarity. I don't know how you make music I've never heard before remind me of being like 6 years old, but good job. Oh, also the FOV is kind of stinky, so is the dungeon color scheme sometimes, and the minimap doesn't look great, but that's about it. 3D Dot Game Heroes is an awesome throwback, and I hope one day it gets a port or something. It's never been released digitally, it's never been featured on PlayStation Now, there's just a physical release, which is still valued pretty high. So Atlas, FromSoft, or Silicon, get on it. These days, Silicon Studio are known for Bravely Default 2nd and are working on Terra Battle 2, and it seems like they haven't really done anything else recently, but I hope they do. Give this one a shot if you can, especially if you love old school Zelda.
As you've seen, the PlayStation 3 has some pretty neat games, but it's with the 6th and 7th generation that Sony decided to go all in with the gimmicks. They were taking the 90s Sega route. More accessories, more plastic, more bulky stuff to take up room in your closet. I actually had one of those PlayStation 1 and 2 memory card converters that you could get at launch, and I still can play my Final Fantasy saves from the 90s today. It's ridiculous. But there's no accessory more bulky than the PlayStation 3i. This thing's huge.
I never understood this one. The PlayStation 3i was an evolution of the PS2 iToy, a short-lived but rather notorious accessory that literally put you into the games you were playing. You could hang out with the Nicktoons, the apes from Ape Escape, or get inserted into a Cardcaptor Sakura visual novel for some reason, but really you were mostly punching and slapping balls like a home version of the finale of Nick Arcade, which to be fair, kinda rules. I thought they'd leave this behind with the PS2, but no, they decided to make one for the PS3. This time around they'd be using it in a variety of ways, even though the supported games were few and far between. The standout, which in my opinion has quickly been forgotten, was the Eye of Judgment. Whoever thought it'd be a good idea to combine card games and a camera was a smart one. You basically position the camera with this ridiculous tower accessory and point it down at a playing mat with cards that you owned. Although good luck finding a complete bundle with the camera, game, mat, starter deck in complete condition and the tower. Or you could just be like me and jerry-rig it. The rules are simple enough, and once you get the camera set up, it works well. You could play against AI, play online, and the game itself was fun, although slow. They even sold booster packs for this thing, cards made by Wizards of the Coast of all companies. Sony leaned pretty hard into the Eye of Judgment at launch, but honestly, it's just way too niche. Also, you could easily cheat online considering it doesn't keep track of what you draw, but that just makes you a loser. If you can't find any booster packs, you can just print out your own cards. They made a PSP sequel to this in 2010 that didn't use physical cards, kind of defeating the point of the entire thing. The Eye of Judgment obviously failed to capture a mainstream audience, but it was neat.
And you could say that for pretty much the entirety of the PS3 camera. And it's kind of weird at this point that Sony's had a camera for their PlayStations ever since the 2 all the way to the 5. But it wasn't until the PlayStation 4 and 5 when they introduced VR in combination with the camera and these that it really made sense. This is the PlayStation Move controller, and yes, it does look wrong.
When paired with the PS3 camera, it used color sphere-based 3D tracking to replicate what Nintendo was trying to do with the Wiimote, and in a lot of cases was way more accurate. But in the world of motion controls, all that matters are the games, and well, there's only 19 Move required games out there, most of which hover in the 5 out of 10 zone. I'm gonna be honest, I skipped every single one of these. In 2010, I just didn't have any interest in playing around with one of these things. Those were my pushes up glasses, PC gamer years, so the concept of my body and the colorful wand being the controller was not very exciting, and based on the fact that Sony said it didn't live up to the expectation on sales, didn't seem to catch on much either. If you're one of those people who was playing SOCOM 4 or Killzone 3 with the Move controller online, let me know in the comments because I don't think you exist. Anyways, the games. Mostly minigame collections of shovelware, and a lot of really cool concepts that dropped the ball based on the fact that the control schemes were kinda rough. Kung Fu Riders, what happens when you combine Sonic the Hedgehog, Pain, and Tony Hawk. 36 on Metacritic. Oh whoa, a new Ape Escape? Wait, the last Ape Escape? An on-rails shooter, 43 on Metacritic. So yeah, they weren't doing the business that Sony probably hoped.
But there's one Move game that I always thought should have been a bit of a bigger deal, and that's mostly because of who's in it. You got Jak and Daxter, Ratchet and Clank, Sly Cooper and Bentley. I'm talking about PlayStation Move Heroes.
53 on Metacritic. Ouch. Developed by Instigate Games, a company with a less than stellar track record, they made PlayStation Move Heroes, a crossover minigame collection for the PlayStation 3, but one that I think gets a little too much flack. To be fair, when you throw Ratchet, Jak, and Sly Cooper into a game together, there's automatically gonna be big expectations, especially because this would be one of Jak's last appearances as Naughty Dog moved on to grittier things. But basically, like any old crossover style game like your Final Fantasy Dissidias and Project Cross Zones, Move Heroes has your protagonist isekai'd into a mystery world in the middle of their own adventures where they're told they have to participate in a friendly game that's totally not gonna get out of hand. And you do so by picking a level, picking a character, and doing the thing. It's got a slow start with long tutorials since it's trying to teach you a lot of different things, but after like 30 minutes it picks up the pace. You've got tower defense, shooting galleries, disc tossing, bowling, and all kinds of different weapons to use. Generally, the Move controller is responsive responsive, which I found contrary to a lot of the reviews I read. Maybe the lighting in my room was perfect, but I had close to no difficulty using this thing. It only really got a little wonky when I would excessively twist the thing around while playing the disc tossing game, but that's on me. For what this is, which is a silly minigame collection filled with things you recognize, it's not half bad. Though I can definitely see how people wanted and expected more. I think they could have taken the shooting and melee combat and fleshed it into a more full experience. Heck, a Ratchet style game would have worked well enough with this control scheme, and unfortunately, what we got was destined to be forgotten. Not quite shovelware, but not bad either. I will say it's one of the only times I haven't totally hated motion controls, but when it involves fishing or bowling, that's kind of cheating. Anyways, here's Clank in a cowboy outfit. I love it. Feels like home.
All right, no more schmoovin', at least not with this thing anyway. The base PlayStation 3 controller, the 6-axis, as you can see right here, is, well, spoilers, I don't have one because they suck. But we gotta talk about it.
Yeah, back in the mid-2000s, Sony had announced that they were removing rumbling from their controllers because it'd, quote, interfere with the 6-axis technology. 6-axis being really low-rent motion controls built into the PlayStation 3 controller. Well, it turns out that was a bold-faced lie, and the, quote, last-gen feature known as rumbling was removed because they were in a lawsuit with a company called Immersion over them rumbles. A year later, they'd come back. Figures. Well, since they were in on the 6-axis technology, this became a staple of early PS3 games. That whole meme of people moving their entire body and arms when playing video games had become a reality, and in order to do things, you'd need to literally move the controller. I was not a fan of this. Nowadays, you can find an evolved version of this tech in any gyro-supported thing like a Joy-Con or the DualSense, but back then, it didn't feel great. Which also meant that big Sony exclusive games were gonna run with it. Heavy Rain, Infamous, Pain, Uncharted Drake's Fortune. If there was an opportunity to become the controller, Sony was gonna take it, and that's like half the reason that Lair sucked. The motion controls in that thing were so rough, they ended up releasing a patch to literally give you a normal control scheme, and that about says it all. The game I remember the most using this though was Warhawk. This thing came out in 2007, and it was a bit controversial. A, because it was a multiplayer only game, which for console in 2007 was extremely unusual, but B, at launch was 100% integrated with the motion controls. If you wanted to fly around and blow dudes up, you were gonna be looking like a kid in a commercial. This was, I guess, a reboot of the PlayStation 1 classic, but the game that interests me here is the spiritual successor, Starhawk. Of course, developed by a totally different studio, Lightbox Interactive, though that's made up by some of the devs of Warhawk. I feel like, despite being a first-party published game and something that by all means should have been a high-profile release for Sony, this went in one ear and out the other. So get this, you play as Emmett Graves, quite literally a space cowboy. The coolest occupation you can have, and it's appropriate that Steve Bloom, Mr. Spike Spiegel himself, plays a side character. Unlike Warhawk, Starhawk was made as a multiplayer and single-player experience, but the solo campaign's a bit lackluster. Not that it matters too much, because you're spending like 90% of the time shooting dudes in mechs, flying planes around planets, flying into space, getting into crazy dogfights, and generally having a good time. The game's also got a building system, so some of the younger ones here might take a look at it and be like, is that a Fortnite? And well, you're not entirely wrong. Starhawk gives me a lot of Transformers Cybertron games vibes, and that's a very good thing. The campaign really shows off the potential of the multiplayer, and I'm super interested in trying it, but they shut that down with zero notice in 2018. So yeah, it's a totally fine third-person shooter, especially for 2012, and the single player was definitely supposed to be a spotlight for the multiplayer. It's just a shame that, just like right now, Starhawk seems to be something that we were all bound to forget about. You can play Warhawk online, as some people have put together some private servers, and maybe that'll happen for Starhawk someday, but for now, this is all we got. All I'm saying is, after playing this, Emmett Graves wasn't a terrible choice for PlayStation All-Stars Battle Royale. God, I miss that game.
The PlayStation 3 had a real rough start. A lot of the games from the launch, and even the first few years, don't really get mentioned often. It's almost like they went in one ear and out the other. With this entire generation of games not being backwards compatible, there's just a lot of stuff you don't see cropping back up.
For example, Lair, also known as the game that unfortunately put Factor 5 out of business. What did they blame the motion controls on? There's also Puppeteer and Rain, two totally fine games that were not only PlayStation exclusives, but totally unique concepts. That's just how Sony was during this time period. Lots of interesting ideas that ended up being forgettable. And also Misato Katsuragi's reporting plan. You ever wanted Evangelion Best Girl to read you the news? Too bad. It only lasted a year.
There's a ton of games like this, especially with the whole digital store aspect, but I only want to talk about one more thing today. When I think of forgotten gems, when I think of things that haven't been ported and are kind of just left to obscurity, I can only think of one game, and that's Folklore.
Folklore was unfortunate. I don't mean that the game is bad or anything, I'm referring to the timing or maybe even the concept. Coming out in the first year of the PlayStation 3, Folklore was made by Japanese developer Game Republic. These were the dudes responsible for the Genji duology, Dragon Ball Origins, and of course the licensed Clash of the Titans game. Everyone remembers that? Yeah? In those first few years, Sony was really hurting for a killer app, something that pushed sales into the stratosphere. Folklore wasn't that game. Like it or not, Metal Gear Solid 4 would be, but that's a whole year later. Folklore was originally going to be a companion piece to a PlayStation portable title called Monster Kingdom Jewel Summoner, but they decided to make it its own thing after that failed to be a hit. In Folklore, you play as two different characters, Ellen and Keats, on their journey to uncover the mystery of a town called Doolin. It has this wondrous aesthetic that's kind of unmatched. Heavily inspired by the Celtic otherworld, you find yourself shifting through different planes, making friends and enemies with creatures from Irish mythology and trying to figure out whatever's going on. Just make sure to constantly hold your hand in front of your cleavage and use a walk cycle like this. Yeah, this is how women move, right? Both of the main characters have different reasons for coming to Doolin. Ellen's looking for her dead mother, who she received a letter from, and Keats writes for an occultist magazine and is looking for scoops. They end up crossing paths, gaining the ability to cross and make friends in the netherworld and utilize their powers. This actually reminds me a lot of something like Cameo, Elements of Power, or Chaos Legion, except good. Both characters bond with Folk, usually with a 6-axis minigame. Then you get their powers and you can assign it to one of the face buttons. So you'll be collecting souls to do attacks with, sometimes furthering their abilities with mini quests. The gameplay itself is a little hack and slashy, but it works well with this system. Plus you have the ability to pause the game and change your loadout at any time, so you don't gotta worry about messing things up. Also, both characters can collect the same souls, but they get used differently, which is awesome. Boss fights usually end up being a fun puzzle. You'll stumble across these books that your character can't read, but they have illustrations that'll provide hints on how to defeat bosses, so they're like puzzles. The gameplay itself doesn't stand out too much, but what makes Folklore special is the overall package. The visuals, the art style, the creatures, the music. Despite being a village based in reality, Doolin's mystery is really alluring, and anytime you shift into the netherworld, it feels like you're walking into a fairy tale. The comic style cutscenes, the fact that you have multiple outfits for the netherworld, everything. You just gotta deal with a little bit of that 7th gen bloom. So then, why did it fail? I think in 2007, the entire industry had seemingly shifted away from Japanese developers being at the forefront. If you look at the most successful games from those years, it's stuff like Oblivion, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, BioShock. With the PlayStation 3 having a really slow start to begin with and not being one of those killer Western titles, Folklore just felt like it was from another generation entirely. Some of the gameplay at times does feel like PlayStation 2 Plus, when you have something like BioShock giving us the ability to like shock dudes standing in water. Physics and elements were becoming mainstay of gaming experiences, and Folklore wasn't quite there with it. But if you ever got the chance to play Folklore, I'm sure you know, it's kind of an unforgettable adventure that'll stick with you. It's just a shame that it's stuck on the PlayStation 3. This one could really use a port. Game Republic had even wanted to make a sequel too. They approached Sony with ideas, even something that would use the Move, but just like Monster Kingdom, its failure to grab sales put that plan to rest. Even though the game was good, weirdly though, it has an online feature that's still up to this day, despite the developer being gone. You can make dungeons for funsies, and well, it's still there. So thanks, guys whose dungeon I beat. You inspired me to make something mean. Simply put, Folklore is a fantastic game that is very much worth your time. It looked fantastic when it came out, it felt cozy in a way that not many things do, and it's got a skeleton named Charlie who plays the saxophone. Truly, what else could you want? A military shooter? Folklore's got that too. We got goblins with muskets and bayonets. Between this and Okami, gamers are silly. Folklore Appreciation Society, rise up.
Well, that's all for today. handful of forgotten PlayStation 3 games. And I know I didn't mention a bunch, as I said, there's over 2,500 things on this console, but of all the games in this video, you should check out MotorStorm Apocalypse, Folklore, and Tokyo Jungle. And hey, 2 of those are available on the PlayStation 4 and 5 streaming service, so you can try that if you don't mind a little crustiness. If you think I missed anything worthwhile, let me know down in the comments, and I'll do my best to check it out one day. And I know, yes, there's like 3 of you who want me to talk about Invisibles. I missed the bus on that one. I'm 32. Anyways, I've been Austin, and catch me next time when, for real, 100% no lie, Metal Gear Survive. It's not a bait and switch, I swear. I got busy. I'm sorry.
Thank you so much for watching. Special Patreon shout out to Blackfoot Ferret, Chris Shelton, Christopher Olivia, Darren Newton, Doug Prince, DX Buster, David Molnar, Elijah, GM Pinks, Hey Quiggles, Jay Roos, Jacoby Fitzpatrick, Kevin Zanowski, Kieran Arter, Nick Irving, P-Funk, and Ryan Talbert. Thank you so much for your generous support. Hey y'all, sorry for the delay in videos this month. I have a lot of stuff lined up over the next few weeks, so we will be way more active, but I decided to take it a little bit easier in July after the onslaught of videos that I did in the last month. However, I do have Metal Gear Survive just about done. The script is almost done. I should have it out next week, and I'm very excited to release it. I mean, it's kind of like Dread, but it's also good at the same time, you know what I'm saying? I have a lot of surprises, a lot of fun things, and you know, I hope you're having a good day. Drink some water, and keep yourself good. All right, I love you, bye.